We have a pretty good panel here. Actually, we have a really good panel here. Sorry about that. We have a really good panel here of experts in open source. And what we're going to do is to start by, it's that time of the day, you know, it's okay, right? If we can't have fun, there's no meaning in this, right? So we're going to start here on this side with David. He's going to introduce himself very briefly, and then we'll go down the line. And we only have to entertain you for 25 more minutes. So by the time, Sang-Ho is done, we'll be over. So David, go ahead, introduce yourself.
My name is David Bainbridge. I work for Sienna. When I was thinking about open source, I thought when was the first time I actually used open source? And I was remembering back to the X10 days. This is not X10, the wireless, the electrical stuff. This was X10 before X11 for graphics back at MIT. So it's been a long time since I've been playing with open source, I think.
Excellent. Bill number one.
Yeah.
There's two Bills, by the way. It's going to be very confusing. Bill Carter, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Bill Carter, I'm the CTO for the Open Compute Foundation. We're the kind of the hardware equivalent of the open source software group.
Hi, Bill Snow. I am responsible for engineering at Open Networking Foundation, and I've been doing that for the last almost 7 years. First time I used open source was interesting because we were at IBM and we open sourced the source code for our TCP/IP product on OS/2, if you remember that. No. And I can remember a marketing person running down the hallway screaming at me, "It's like, what are you doing putting our source code out into the free world," right? And I mean, that was the kind of the standard of what was going on in the internet at that time, right? And I don't know, it was pretty socially changing, I would say, for IBM at that time. So it's been many years since that point, been in a lot of open source projects since then. And of course, most recently, all the ones at ONF.
He's got a real mic.
Right. I got a mic. Hello, my name is Sang-Ho Shin from the SK Telecom. I'm the lead of the SGM project at SK Telecom, and we have been developing the Sona. It's our own SGM projects, and then we have been contributing our full solution to the owners for almost for 5 years. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So, audience, we're going to discuss, what it means to have a successful open source project, how to grow community and all that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and the different open source models. We're going to do that very, very quickly. But maybe we start off with, what are possible goals, right, for an open source project, or what does success mean? Because, is it the most contributors? Is it the most code? Is it the most people who use your code? Right? Or is it something else, right? So what possible goals could an open source organization have? Maybe start with David.
Well, since we're developing code, I think the most important thing is the code actually does what it's intended to do. I don't care how many people contributed to it. I don't care the number of people in the community. Have we accomplished the goal we set off to do? And that, I think, is the main goal of any project. In terms of open source, I think the community is, can we get the 1,000 flowers ideas, right? Yep. And you have to balance that with, of course, having a strong kind of opinionated direction as well. You don't want to go 1,000 flowers in one project. You want 1,000 projects where one of them actually succeed, that type of thing. And
we're getting close to 1,000 SDN controllers.
You don't want to get...
I'm kidding.
Yeah, you don't want to lose the focus of what you're trying to accomplish, but accomplish one thing, accomplish it well, and get that done. And the community will come, actually, I think.
Excellent. Mr. Carter?
Yeah, I think that, like you say, you don't want to measure success in the amount of code that you create, but I'd like to think that we measure success in how fast we accelerate technology. And, when you put a group of individuals, engineers, smart people in a room, they can be creative. And to the degree that we can share that creativity and develop, better products and do it faster, I think that's a real measure of success. And I mentioned products because I think the other attribute of successful projects is that it actually turns into a product and you go into production. So again, it's innovation, speed of technology, and actually hitting that end goal of going into production with something.
Got it. Bill Snow?
So first I'll say being successful in open source projects is only maybe a little bit better than being successful as an entrepreneur. I think the last report I read is 1 in 6 projects are successful. Think of startups, maybe it's 1 in 10. So a lot of projects fail. And I think that broadly speaking, whether it's successful depends, I think, on what you're setting out to do, right? And I mean, there's a lot of different goals for open source projects, but if you kind of clamp it down to our industry and what would be successful in our industry, I think it's saving a lot of time for people, right? Because without open source, you've got tremendous waste, right, and duplication of creation of elements, right? And we're looking for areas that are common to many, right? And the ability to kind of share the investment and help everybody, I'd say, do more in a faster time. And I do think there's an element of you have to be serving some particular community. Some community has to be benefiting from the work that you're doing, right? So.
Sang-ho? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. As I said, I've been we have just started our own OpenStack, the open source projects based on ONF like 4 years ago. Like started from 2014, and then still I'm now doing the same project. The reason is that it's not yet commercialized. So we are under product stage. So the Sona and ONOS will be integrated our telco infra finally next year. So I think maybe the most successful project should be like commercialized. I think that's the first one thing. Mm-hmm. And then second thing is that that project should give some benefits not only to us, to any others. So. Any other people, any other company should be able to use that open source projects. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. So appreciate it. So different goals, right? Meet your goals, whatever it is, right? Commercialization, obviously a very important goal because eventually it has to be commercialized. Yeah. Otherwise, that's the end of it, right? All right, maybe. So, but let's take a look at different open source models, right? So I think open source was probably popularized. I don't know who's read the actual paper, Cathedral and the Bazaar, right, by Eric S. Raymond, ESR. Oh, God, okay, that's... All right, there was this paper used around, I think, huh? 97, something like 97, yeah, thereabouts. Eric S. Raymond, who is one of the big advocates in open source, called the Cathedral and the Bazaar. And Cathedral was basically, academics, very high-thinking intellectuals sitting in there and trying to figure out, and then the bazaar obviously is where the marketplace, where things happen, and that was viewed as the model for open source, right? And so if Cathedral is, very smart engineers working in, you could argue it, some vendor like IBM or whatever it is. Actually, IBM did open source very, very early on, but pick your favorite vendor or your most unfavorite vendor, right? And that's a Cathedral. They're doing stuff magically inside because they're smarter than everyone, and then, one of these days you'll see it. Bazaar is marketplace, open everything, share everything, go figure it out. So obviously, open source is as an open model, right? And then there's the ONF curated model. So I don't know what, so if you don't like the Bazaar because it's too messy, it's too wet, it's too dirty, maybe you go to Whole Foods, and maybe Whole Foods is the curated model, right? I don't know. For example, Timon's going to kill me right after this. You watch. He's giving me dagger eyes right now. But there's different flavors of open source models. I think the point, right? And so what flavors do you see out there right now? And pros, cons. What do you think of the curated model that ONF has, right? Serves a purpose, or it's not really open source, or it is, or what? What do you think, David?
Okay. First, I think the key aspect of the community has got to be merit, which means if you are contributing code to the community, if you're contributing to the community, you get a higher status. And that happens in many different models, but that's a key factor for open source. If people are contributing and they're not gaining kind of authority, influence in a community, they're going to drop out. Okay. Now, the curated model, or benevolent dictatorship almost, is a little
Who's
bit...
Who's the dictator?
No. Is interesting. Keep going. And there's some benefits there. I mean, part of it is, what do you do when you're starting a community? Right. And even in the curated model, particularly with what ONF did, is they said, look, we're going to curate it for a while, but as it matures, we're going to let other people into that inner ring. I'll be honest, it's still hard to get into that inner ring, and there are decisions that are made in hallway conversations just by the nature of the beast. And those are actually fewer than they have been in the past, but they still exist. So I think that the curated model is nothing bad with it, but I think it does have to transition into a more merit-based system over time. And so those curators need to be able to be influenced or changed over time. And that's where I think we need to see that. The other models where you kind of got the Wild West, I think you're always in trouble in those because people are going to get focused, you're going to get splinters, you're going to get forks, and the minute you start forking, you're dead, right? Either one fork succeeds and the rest fail, or they just all fail. So having kind of a good architectural direction and a strong voice in that is needed in a community.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, Linux kernel is curated. The benevolent dictator used to be Linus, right?
Yes.
So it's not unusual. That's yeah. Mr. Carter, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree completely. Just add a couple of new things to that. And we've seen projects. So Open Compute Project's been around for 7 years. This is our 7th year, 2018, and we've had an opportunity to launch several projects, and some of those have been embedded software projects. Some have been successful and some of them haven't. And I think I look back at the successes, and it has to do with the number of companies that are actually contributing code and how they were able to have some type of shared influence. So back to what you were saying is that they have a stake in the outcome, and they have influence over the group, and more importantly is you have several companies that are backing that. So in the event that strategies shift and somebody backs away, or somebody who had been predominantly the contributor, and now they're gone off to something else, is that the project doesn't fall apart. It's able to continue on. I think that's really important. And those are the characteristics that we look when we incubate new projects, is make sure that we have adequate support from a much larger community, and that means onboarding and make sure that we don't establish this hierarchy or this leadership team too early. We want to make sure that we have plenty of people that can influence that, and ideally those are code contributors, right? But beyond that, I think the other aspect of successful projects is that you're taking it from source code to through a validation phase and into productization, and so you're testing your software with your hardware with your software, and you're actually building a solution. And so you have to look at that as another aspect of that project. Do you have, are you building solutions and testing the combination of hardware and software? And then the third aspect is that, do you really have a go-to-market plan? So I've seen a lot of very exciting open source projects that don't have a go-to-market plan, and so they produce wonderful demos, but those demos actually never see the market. And so I think that one of the things that ONF is doing is by having engineers that are testing and doing these POCs, they've kind of solved that second piece of it, is that we're actually doing that integration and that test and testing it with hardware and developing recipes. And again, we've kind of looked at that and said on top of that, we have to have a marketplace and a means to deliver that POC or that solution or that recipe. And so I think you have to look at all of those things. It's not just the developers and the code base, but it's how does it get tested, how does it get to the customer, and then ultimately how does it get supported out there.
Thank you. Bill Snow?
Actually, I'd like to...
Sang-Ho first?
Let's say
you go first.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm also working on the OpenStack Foundation. So, and I would say that maybe OpenStack projects is based on the fully community-driven, and maybe ONOS is a rather maybe a curated model, I think. Mm-hmm. And then also we have also in Korea also we have ONOS code working group, and we have 30 to 40 active members, and then we discuss it the ONOS and code things, and then we are getting a little bit because even though I'm not in the inner circle of the ONOS, but still I'm getting complaints from them I think maybe ONOS is too closed, it's not really it's not they feel that ONOS is not driven by community. They feel that ONOS and also code is driven by some the partners maybe, and then I know that looks like in the first stage maybe AT&T was leading. Well, of course, it was still AT&T is still leading the ONOS and code, and later maybe the focus is moving a little bit Comcast or something. So like, I'm not saying that it's true, but we are just from the outside of the owners, we are getting a little bit like feeling that like, the owners community should be a little bit like more democratic now. Yeah.
Got it. So I think we're getting a little bit into sort of the different aspects, right, of the 1,000 flowers bloom, but then you have 1,000 flowers to step through, which, you know, a lot of those may not bloom, right? Basically, or curated approach where maybe, you know, you're more careful about picking the right flowers, and you have a master horticulturalist who can make it bloom better, right, and make it, you know, work better. And there's the definite, you know, because even not in Linus's inner circle on the kernel group, you had no way of getting stuff in the kernel back when, right? And I think what you're saying now is that if you have a curated model, and the key members who pay, you know, a substantial amount of money a year get to drive that, then is it really open source? Or it's open source to the extent I can take it, but I have little influence, right? And so that ability to have influence can create maybe some challenges. So maybe let's, if we're okay with that, maybe dig into that a little bit better. Are there ways to mitigate something like that, right? For instance, right? Make it more open. Bill.
Yeah. So I've been trying to crack this nut actually for 7 years now on how to get a good community growing in our projects, and we haven't done what we really wanted to do, and we've tried a few different angles on it. To be honest, it's been a little bit of a frustrating journey, but in trying to move a technology forward towards production, there has been certain goals that we wanted to take that, one, caused us to have an engineering team, and two, caused us maybe to be not as accepting of the other directions that people might have pulled it. So for example, if we'd done, I spent time talking with a lot of guys in the Linux Foundation, right? And the whole thing is, hey, just kind of let people join and it'll just kind of blossom from there, right? But what we experience in a market like this, where we're trying to actually open up a market to change the dynamics of it, there's a lot of behaviors that are not maybe helpful to the rest of the community, right? And so one of the roles that we've played is to try and make sure that what people do is for the benefit of the community, right? Now, but in doing that now, we maybe shut out some people that wanted to play in that community and wanted to drive it in a direction that maybe helped them and their sub-community. So I think it's been really hard to get the right thing, but I think ultimately you need to have, I mean, open source, somebody's coming up with a solution typically that they want, and they want to pull it into their own systems, right? But here we have operators, and they don't have a lot of developers that are trying to pull something new into their own systems, right? They've relied on OEMs. Well, the OEMs don't want to, you know, destroy their business models to get it into the operator systems, right? So we've kind of been missing this pull, because you get that pull, you get the participation, and so I don't know. So I think now, certainly in the last year, we've seen that change with the RDs, because now the suppliers see that there is a group of operators behind something. Now there is business to be had. Maybe it's not in the same way it used to be, but there are people that see business now, and now they're willing to start moving more developers into that. And so now I hope that we start getting traction. I hope a year from now my problem will be that, God, the communities are so big I can't figure out what to do with them.
Tell them to go fork off a branch and then do it their own way, right? But so it sounds like you know, curated as a starting point has issues, right? Obviously, because of lack of maybe openness, right, or transparency. But if you can get the critical mass and there is attractiveness around that core capability, then you can open it up a little bit more, right? It's kind of like a nursery, protecting it while it's growing until it's big enough to weather the winds and put it outside. David, I don't know. Yes, no.
So
bad.
Part of it is there's a long game here, right? And personal experience, right? Disaggregation and no-nos. We've been pushing that for many, many years.
Yep.
And if you want influence in the community, you typically have to be obnoxious and to get in, right? You have to contribute code, but you have to be forthright. You have to go out there and push. And that's how you kind of gain influence in the community. Be obnoxious in a nice way, I guess. And so I've noticed a lot of developers have problems with that. That's not a development model they're used to if they're doing internal development. They're not always out there to put themselves out there and do it. But so we've been pushing disaggregation for a number of years, and we're starting to see that fruit come. But that's that long game, where if I was doing something internally in my company, because I'm not necessarily just in that influence role, I could do that direction change real quickly. The other thing I think we have here, again using ONF as an example, is technologies underneath are changing drastically faster than the product itself. And at some point when you're doing product development, you have to just cannibalize what you have, right? Put it on a shelf, stabilize it, whatever, cannibalize it and move forward to the new technologies. Yep. And I've seen that as a very slow, again, path within this community. And that's because they're trying to reach goals, other goals, right? But at some point, you're falling behind some of the technology curves in this development. And that's a problem I've seen too. So, you know, is a curator model good, bad? I think it had some benefits up front.
Yep, no.
But at some point, we, as vendors, we need to be able to have better influence, see change greater in the product so that it fits our customers' needs, how we see it fit those customers' needs.
Without forking.
Without forking, and forking is death.
Right. Bill Carter, any thoughts shared from your experiences at OCP that could help?
You know, I don't know. We've had, you know, a couple of projects, a couple of contributions that we started years ago, and, you know, we had a single company that pushed it, and, you know, they had a vision, and
right.
I look at the ONI project,
yep.
You know, as an example, and,
yep.
you know, and the vision was to, you know, make sure every switch had that as the boot scheme, and, and, you know, it was, you know, wildly successful. I think every white box switch.
That's correct. They all jumped on. But and I think the contributors there were very open-minded, and they had good standing in the community. And part of it was that too. Right?
Yeah. And you know, but over time, you know, that had to, you know, Cumulus did all the heavy lifting on that for years, and that's it's evolving now, and we're starting to see a lot more, you know, folks that are providing support. So. You know, I think the model shifts over time.
Right. And
we've seen, by the way, similar types of work with, you know, embedded firmware and Sonic and things like that. We have one company that's absolutely dedicated to, you know, get that initial, you know, product over the finish line.
Right.
And then I think you got to onboard a lot of other players and kind of get it into more mainstream. You know, open source.
When you get to V2, then it's going to be a bit different model, right? Because now the goals are slightly different. You've achieved the original goals. I think that's fair.
And the hardware follows the same model as well.
Yep. No, I think that's fair. So at this point, we have a couple of minutes left before beers are available. I would actually like to open it up to the audience. You know, we have maybe, you know, a couple of minutes. Do you have any pressing questions that you want to ask our experts up here, and so that they can share their wisdom with you? That's pretty bad. Huh? Let me rephrase the question. Yes, Bob, go ahead. Yeah.
So, question for Bill.
Which Bill?
Snow. Mr. Snow. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, Bill. Now, and again, I have a little secondhand information because I haven't been that close, but I've heard that some of the code in ONF is open and some of the code is not open. And so I'm kind of curious as to what you could comment with regards to that.
Yeah, so I think probably that would be in reference to Stratum, right? So Stratum came out of Google's infrastructure and needed a fair amount of work to be consumable by a community, right? And so we've been working together with Google and actually now about, I don't know, 30 or maybe even more companies, so it keeps growing. But the goal has been to, as you pull it out, you're missing a lot of the other infrastructure pieces, right, that have to kind of be put in place to make Stratum whole, right? And so we call this a pioneering phase, and we're about to exit the pioneering phase, and then we're going to spend another, I don't know, 3 to 6 months really getting it ready to be easily consumed in open source community with documentation examples and all the types of things that you'd like to get. Anybody can join that. They just need to be a paying member of ONF, and they need to sign an agreement that says they won't take the code and redistribute it. You know, so I think it's open for those who want to participate.
It's open to members.
Yep.
Yeah. Is that the policy on all of Cord and ONOS?
No, everything else is open source.
Yeah, the open Cord is
this one. This one came with a particular requirement because it came out of Google's infrastructure, right? And until it becomes open source as opposed to stuff out of Google's infrastructure.
Actually, my confusion had been over the NGIC stuff.
What stuff?
The NGIC, the C3PO.
Yeah.
Bits of that were closed
for
a while, I guess.
So the MCord EPC software is another situation because that was open source, and then we found out that there were I don't know, a dozen files that had some origins with GPL, and so we had to shut down the repos, and we've been going through the process of really clean slating those functions, right, to get ready to. Yeah. It wasn't working. But
the proprietary stuff wasn't working, so okay.
Yeah, so I think when hopefully January will be the time when we have a brand new EPC, and I think it will be just a huge improvement over what was there before, because it's way more than just fixing what was there. It supports almost the most recent revision, right? It's been brought to a level of productization plus scale that can be immediately deployed because it is being deployed by some of the people that are behind creating it. So it's going to be a whole other ball game. So maybe that's the benefit of this.
The SIBA stuff is going to be open repo as well?
SIBA stuff's there now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Very good.
Very good. Thank you. I
Thanks.
appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Bob. Thank you.
Sorry for putting you in the spot there.
Any questions? Any other questions? Yes, Ross, go ahead. We can.
Which bill?
Yeah. They like
okay.
Bill.
We're highly available.
Yeah. Look, I could get rid of one.
Are you active? Or active?
We'll find out. We'll shut one down and see what happens.
Actually, it's for both of you because I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how open source works differently if you're talking about software versus hardware.
That's a good question. Bill.
How open source works for hardware versus
How open source is different for
different.
software versus hardware? And I mean, Bill Carter said that there were similarities earlier. You were pointing out that. But
well,
yeah, go ahead.
I think on the hardware side, one thing that we have to do is work as a community and develop a specification, and so that tends to, I don't know if it takes any longer or shorter than a software project. It's probably about the same, but there's a lot of kind of engineering, just core engineering work to get that specification done, and and with software you do a lot of kind of core development, before you're actually trying to put something, build something for the first time, and so that's similar. After you've got that specification done, what happens then is you get a lot of companies that can go off and design to that spec, and so that ends up being very independent, and those companies tend to be competitors with each other, and so that's much different than software. Whereas the software, once your core functionality is built into the code, you start building it up into the productization and the validation tools and so on. And in software, that's where you really collaborate, is how do you do continuous integration and validation and so on. And so we really part at that point.
Bill Snow?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and the specifications, we get pressed a lot for, well, why don't you have solid APIs, right? And as though in inventing some of this stuff, we actually could have enough foresight to know what those APIs would look like, right? And so there's a lot of iteration on the software, and it's rightly frustrating that there aren't APIs that are stable right off the bat. You can go and integrate the open source with. Hopefully these come over time as it becomes very clear where the points of demarc are and where the interfaces need to be. I think we still have, in some of the projects we still have ways to go there to figure out where those are. Like, for example, the controller, we've had a lot of discussions where northbounds are. On the other hand, Stratum's very different. Stratum has a pretty well-defined set of interfaces already for operations and config and control. So
it came to you baked.
Right. Yeah. So it's had. Yeah. Exactly. It's had enough.
It's been baked.
Baking time, right?
Yeah, you got an apple pie. You didn't get apples.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Apples. Yep.
Speaking of Whole Foods, yeah, you got an apple pie. Yeah. Very good. Sorry, Ross. Did that answer your question? Are you satisfied? You are? I was going to make them do it again, but yes. Thank you. All right, I think we're at beer time, I believe. Timon, is there beer outside?
I'm hoping so.
Should we check before we let everyone out?
Or we can storm the gates and see it. Storm the Whole Foods.
We could storm the cathedral. That's what we could do. All right, winter is coming here. So, actually, winter is almost here. It is. Yeah, actually. So David speaks the truth. But anyhow, appreciate everyone's time for the last half an hour. And again, let's give the panel a round of applause for their time.